Now let's look at properties that are related to our date dimension. For one thing, we know that we need to rename the date key to date. And before we deploy, let's take a look at the browser and just see what we have currently. We have calendar year, which looks correct with the sort order. And if we look at month, we see that we have an alphabetical sort by year, which is not correct. So we'll need to fix that. And then we look at quarter, and we can see that we have individual quarters here in the correct sequencing. So if we want to sort the month attribute, our options were to either sort by key value, and our key value right now for this particular attribute is set to month. And if you recollect that the month attribute is set to this year plus the month name in there, and that's an alphabetical sort, and we don't want to do that. What we can do to accomplish both our goal of uniquely identifying each record and changing the sort would be to reset the key column to look both at the year as well as the month number of year. So we can remove month as the key column and specify calendar year and month number of year to force a numeric sort in calendar year order. So that way we have a composite key. However, anytime we create a composite key, notice the red wavy line here, it tells us that we are required to provide a name column when we have multiple columns specified for the key. So we'll go back to our original month column here for the name, and then that resolves the error. So let's deploy this project. And go to the browser, reconnect, and let's check the month attribute, and now we can see that our months are properly sorted. Now, in addition to making sure that we've got the names and the sorting all defined correctly within a dimension, our date dimension has special characteristics. Usually in the presentation layer, client tools may have certain features that are associated with time-based calculations and therefore need a designation within analysis services to identify the dimension that is the date dimension. In addition, there are certain MDX functions that require our date dimension to be configured correctly. MDX is the query and modeling language that we use with analysis services. The fastest way to set up these properties for our date dimension would be to use the wizard that's found on the first button in our toolbar in the Dimension Designer. It's called Add Business Intelligence. So it walks through a wizard, and we would specify dimension intelligence here, and we would specify the dimension type. And in this case, the dimension type is time. So there are certain types of dimensions where our front-end tool applications will respond to the type. So for example, there might be a mapping tool that would need to know about a geography dimension where we would identify a country or a city or a state or a zip code. Those attributes would need to be flagged as such within that dimension, and so this wizard would help us do that. Or if we're doing currency conversions, we would need to be able to specify different characteristics of our currency. Or if we're doing a financial application, we need to specify how to identify assets and liabilities and revenues versus expenses and so forth. So there's certain behaviors that are associated with these dimension types. Most of the time, the regular dimension type is adequate, but for certain scenarios, such as with date, we want to set the dimension type. And then we would map our attribute type associated with that dimension type to the specific attribute that we're using within our dimension structure. So for example, if I include the attribute type of year, then I need to tell the wizard where to find the corresponding attribute in my dimension. In this case, it's called calendar year. Quarter would be mapped to my quarter attribute, and month is mapped to my month attribute. So it does not automatically detect these mappings based on attribute names. We'll need to manually specify these attributes ourselves. Then we click Next, and then click Finish, and then we're done. And so what's happened here is various attribute settings were set. For the date dimension itself, we have a type of time. If we go to the calendar year, we can see that there's a type of years, and so on. So that way, if I were to use a function like year to date or quarter to date, then Analysis Services knows exactly which attribute contains years or quarters respectively. And then when we're done, of course, we would deploy, and our dimension will be updated accordingly.